This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Technical Director Peter Motzenbecker. Former Juventus coach discusses his work as a technical director and how he supports coaches within his program, the development of game models and how this assists both players and coaches, as well as his work on the Twitter hashtag SundayShare and how he investigates the use of pitch markings both at the professional level and in his own sessions. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So Peter, really appreciate you jumping on. As I said, not too early a start. I know the first time I gave to you would have been about 3:00 in the morning, which I don't think would have gone down well with the family. But
No, yeah,
all good your end?
yeah, all good. Yeah, it's not too bad of a start time. That's perfect, actually. But yeah, I'm looking forward to obviously discussing lots of different things. It's always good to connect with different people. So I'm excited for the questions to come.
Good. So I think, as I said to you before, kind of there's a couple of areas that really have interested me. One is kind of your technical director role, and then the other one being around a lot of the content you create, looking at strategies, tactics within football. So for people who maybe don't know you, don't know your background, you just want to give us a kind of brief oversight as to what you currently do and maybe some highlights of how you've got there.
Sure. So I currently work for a club called New England Football Club in Massachusetts. And the club, like a lot of clubs in America, have multiple regions across, maybe the state. So in our club, we cover pretty much the whole state of Massachusetts, but that's like a lot of different, it's a big state. So kind of geographically we're pretty spread out and it's pretty condensed. So it takes a long time to get from even across the city. So, the club is split into different regions. So my role is I oversee the technical stuff in one of the regions within the club, which is about 500 players in my region. I mean, the club as a whole has about 2,500. So I look over maybe 20 coaches as a whole. And like I said, 500 players. And so I'm part of a technical committee within the club. Because the club is kind of so spread out, it makes sense to have multiple people kind of in similar roles that come together to talk about the things that are going on in their region. And I just joined NEFC this past summer. I was at a club called Juventus, which is associated with Juventus Academy in Turin, but this one's obviously an American-based group. I'm not really sure, what the exact relationship is because I was there during COVID, and usually Juventus would send coaches across and we would work kind of hand in hand with them, but that didn't happen. So I didn't get that full experience. And before that, I was at GPS, Global Premier Soccer, which brings over a lot of UK and Irish coaches to work for them. So I experienced a lot of different people from kind of all over the world. I mean, they brought people from Eastern Europe over, South Africa, things like that. So I was there for 2.5 years. Working my way up from kind of overseeing a region in terms of just logistical stuff like scheduling and coach management and things to being the technical director of the club as a whole, which covered, I think they were in, 30 states almost. And that was I got that role right as COVID hit. So every day during that period, I was I wasn't really doing technical director stuff at that point. I was coming up with, we create session plans for the players to do at home. So I was creating something new every day for the players. which was incredibly stressful time because COVID had just started. We were trying to like, you know, but yeah, that was my first kind of big kind of step into the technical director area, was working for GPS in that role. And prior to COVID, it was fun, like, working with the coaches, doing lots of coaches education, um, you know, just designing a way forward for the club.
Um, I guess first question for me is kind of around technical director. So what does that role actually entail? I guess the easiest thing is where you currently are. What does that look like? What's your remit? And how does that affect you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So primarily my role is, I work with it. I mostly work with the coaches, kind of on an individual level. So when I first joined NEFC, I had a meeting with every single coach that works for the region I'm in, to talk about where they felt they were as a coach, where they felt they could improve, where they wanted to go in their coaching pathway. Um, and so that kind of gave me insight on who everyone was, kind of what their ambition was. And from there, what I've done throughout the year is kind of help them develop to where they want to be as best as I can. So I've left a lot of it to them to come to me as a resource, but I also go out on the field, with them. And the process I have right now is I'll record a session of theirs. Um, I'll ask them for feedback on, like, self-reflective feedback on how they think their session went. Um, I'll go in and I'll take data from the session. So I'll rewatch it, and I have just an Excel document where I go in and I record every single interaction they have with the players. So for instance, if they go in and have an intervention moment with the team, I'll categorize that as to how, like, the coaching methods that they used, whether it was like question answer, whether it was trial and error, etc. I'll talk about whether their content, like the content they were giving, was kind of corrective, whether it was negative, whether it was positive. I'll talk about the people that they addressed. So whether it was an individual moment, whether it was a unit based, or whether it was team based moment. Did they correct technical stuff? Did they correct tactical stuff? So I'll gather all that information for every single coaching moment, whether it's an intervention or in the flow, and I put it all in, this document. And so that kind of helps them take and I'll also give them subjective feedback kind of on the session structure itself, on the coaching points they gave and the content of it. And so I'll give them that objective data, and then my subjective feedback, and we talk through it all. We talk about their self-reflection. And then we talk about, okay, so this is where we are right now. What are our next steps? What are your next steps? So lots of the coaches will kind of see the data, especially like things like interventions, like the intervention time length. So I record the amount of time they're in for an intervention. And they'll be like, okay, well, I want to work on getting my coaching points to be more concise and more to the point, so that the ball is rolling more. Cause that's another metric that I capture, is the ball rolling time compared to the session stoppage. So we'll work on how they can progress towards maybe making sure that the ball is rolling more, and how they can make their interventions more concise. But it's just kind of we just talk through it, and I have enough of these with each individual coach where it's kind of a constant thing where we're always able to look at new data and see if they're moving in the right direction in terms of their specific goals. So like I said, there's 15 to 20 coaches in the region that I oversee. So it takes a lot of time. And I coach 2 teams myself. So every day I could be out on the field working with coaches and working with my own teams. So sometimes just that amount of that volume is hard to really have such a significant impact immediately. So I always came into this role like knowing it was going to take over a year to really implement, um, not only making coaches better, but then a more cohesive kind of style of play, game model. So I think I'm in step one of making sure, trying to get coaches, to a level where they want to be. And then kind of my year two process is to really work on implementing how we want the club to play, um, which is going to be a whole different kind of challenge. But I think we're working in the right direction towards that.
Okay, so we'll definitely get onto the game model stuff because I do see that floating around quite a lot on social media at the moment. I'm really interested in it. In terms of the quantitative side, where did you get the frameworks for those interactions? So obviously you kind of go in and go, right, we're looking at type of interaction, ball rolling and stuff. Was there any particular framework that you used, or was it experiential that someone had done that with you and you found that useful? Where did that come from?
Um, some of it's experiential, but most of it is from, and I'm not going to remember his name, but he was, and I don't remember his role either, but he was at Aston Villa. He was in their academy. He gave a presentation that I saw where he talked about kind of this exact thing, where he talked about we go in every single session we record and they live code it. So I guess he has someone there that maybe works with Huddle or whatever it is, live coding the session itself. Um, and so his framework is really what I worked off of. I don't have the same tools that he does, but the way he presented the data and, um, kind of got it all together was basically what I designed mine based off of. So, and it's bad that I can't remember his name because I've basically taken his work. Um, I'm not sure if he's at Aston Villa anymore. I think he was going to move on, but he talked about how they were starting to use like Google glasses to put on their coaches to like just be able to see what they were seeing in a way. So his ideas were very much like kind of the next level in terms of really educating his coaches.
I think that's a
But
really
yeah,
interesting one actually, because we talk about that with players, don't we, in terms of where's their focus and ability of scanning. That's one you hear a lot. But
yeah,
I remember listening to a conversation, I think, about Brendan Rodgers, and he was talking about basically when the ball's up the final thirds, his focus is in his defensive players. What are they doing? How they set up and stuff, and looking away from the ball and vice versa. And I think, yeah, using those Google glasses that's able to track where your pupils go and stuff actually as a tool could be really interesting because it allows you to see what is the coach focused on. Is he just focused on where the ball's going all the time? Or is he
yeah,
actively spending time looking at the tertiary players around it and how they're affecting the play? So I really like that idea.
yeah. It could be really useful kind of data to see, what we as coaches actually focus on. Because I know I think the thing about data is we say a lot of things about ourselves as coaches. And then when we actually like sit down and whether it is just rewatching yourself coaching, there's so many things that you see, from yourself as a coach. So you're like, I did not think that I did that. I thought that I did that better, you know?
That was going to be my next question. So obviously, when you're using this quantitative data as a mirror going back to people, I'd imagine that can at times be quite illuminating. So is there any particular examples you've got where someone's self-reflection has kind of been dramatically changed by then you presenting them with this data?
Um, Maybe, yeah, maybe just maybe, this was me as well because I did my USB license this probably about a year ago now. Um, And when I watched, like, we had to record our sessions a lot for that. And I used to always think that like my intervention moments were, nice and quick. I was in and out. And then when I rewatched my videos, I was like in there for way too long. And you could tell, you look around the field, which you're probably not doing as a coach when you're in the moment, but on video, you're looking around the field and you're seeing, well, that kid's lost interest after 30 seconds. That kid's lost interest after 40 seconds. Oh, now you're losing them all. But yeah, so I think that was probably been the primary thing that I found from other coaches as well. Just like they used to think that they're more concise with their feedback, um, in intervention moments in particular. And, the data shows that, well, you're in there for 2.5 minutes and you've just lost everyone's attention. That's probably been the biggest kind of takeaway from all the coaches, is just that piece in terms of making sure that you're keeping the attention of players and limiting your time within your coaching point and kind of trying to condense it while also providing the information that you need to.
And how do you manage that? So how do you manage them either being more concise with their point or maybe not interfering as much so the ball that is rolling?
Yeah, well, I think the latter or the former there is probably more easy to coach into coaches, because lots of times when coaches do make stoppages, um, they veer away from the specific moment that they've stopped, and they start to talk about different things that are relevant but don't necessarily apply, and that's where you start to see that length of time come into play, right? So
Can you give
part
me
of
an
that,
example of that?
well, you've put me on the spot now. Um, so say your center back gets the ball and you're looking to have them play into a midfielder. Okay, great. So you go in, like a coach will go in and make the stoppage, and you'll talk about maybe the midfield rotation and how you can free a player up in midfield. Um, and that's fine. That probably wouldn't take that long. But then coaches will start to talk about, well, how can the fullback impact that? How can the other center back? Can the other center back be an option? And can we move the ball to the other center back and then create an option going forward that way? Whereas you stopped because of a specific moment you saw with one center back having the ball, and maybe the midfield wasn't doing something that you liked. But now you've started to talk about, okay, well, if we don't see that, maybe we swing the ball to the other center back and see if they're the ones that can play the entrance pass. So it's kind of going away from, you saw a problem in terms of your midfield not making the right movements that you wanted to make to free a player up in there. But now you've decided, instead of fixing that problem only, you're going to talk about, okay, now I'm going to give you another solution and another solution and another solution. So I think just like, it's good to obviously provide players with numbers of different solutions to a problem, but in terms of being able to coach them, I think you need to stay on a specific moment and work on the specific problem that you saw, and then allow them to try and implement that. And then if you see another problem, okay, our midfield is rotating well, but now the defensive team has adjusted to that. So now what can we do to open things up? So yeah, rather than giving like 3 or 4 or 5 solutions to a problem, just focus on the specific problem that you saw. Kind of limits the amount of time you're in there. And so that's been like a big focus of getting across to the coaches, is make sure you coach what you actually saw and fix that issue, rather than trying to fix everything else as well.
And in terms of the intervention styles, have you seen a lot? Is it heavily weighted toward one style or one type of intervention, or does that vary from coach to coach?
It's definitely more question and answer, which is good. And I think a lot of that comes down from the federation. When you go on coaching courses in the US, so much of what they want you to do is just continue to probe the players for answers. And so coaches definitely use question and answer a lot more than, command or trial and error and things like that. But then the next part of that is making sure that the questions are actually good questions, that lead to kind of a thought process for the players. But that's definitely been, I think if I were to get all the data together, that would be, you would definitely see the question and answer being the primary usage of the coaches in terms of how they're approaching those intervention moments.
And I won't ask you to name an individual because it wouldn't necessarily be fair. But is there one in particular individual that you work with that you think uses a particular methodology or a particular style really, really well? Be that question and answer or command. Is there one that you can highlight in your head? You go, yeah, actually, they use this really well, and here's an example of how they do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure there's definitely one or two coaches where, especially the question and answer and stuff, again, because they've gone through kind of the federation courses and have been exposed to that in a setting where they've already been evaluated based on that, where they go in and they're able to ask really pointed, specific questions. But it's all about, I think the success of that is all about kind of planting the seed beforehand and kind of building up to your questions from previous sessions as well. It's really hard to go in and ask players questions if you haven't kind of talked about the topic beforehand, and worked your way up to the topic beforehand. So I think that's kind of the key to it, is making sure that you're not overloading the players, but also making sure that they have some cursory like information beforehand, that allows them to, feel successful in answering your questions.
Do you have any individuals that maybe are outliers in the way that they coach? That could be positive or negative.
Yeah, of course. Of course. So I think one of the things to understand about American youth soccer in general is that, there are so many, because it's very money driven. Like I said, the club I work for has 2,500 players across the state. GPS in Massachusetts alone had close to 5,000. So you have to imagine the amount of coaches that you need to be available to coach those players is extremely high. And of course, because of that, you're going to get a variety of quality within your coaches. And so the age range as well, there will be some coaches who have coached for a long time and did their primary coaching in an era where everything was very much command style and, my way or the highway type, coaches. And now that's not as effective because kids have changed, players have changed. They need more of that transformational leadership. And now, so if you see those coaches on the field, they're very identifiable. You could see like the interactions between that coach and those players is an outlier at this point, which is good, I think. Because I think the like question and answer and things like that are much more effective in terms of player retaining information. So yeah, you definitely do see outliers in terms of kind of older school types of coaches, throughout definitely US soccer, but I'm sure everywhere in the world still are coaches that are kind of stuck in their ways a bit and haven't kind of grown with the times and grown with how kids have changed.
Yeah, I don't think it's just a US problem. I think it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So in terms of maybe challenging those behaviors, because obviously you've got to have a relationship with these people and you want them to be themselves because authenticity is one of the key aspects of a good coach. How would you go around maybe challenging them to change some of their language or some of their practices so that it's maybe more aligned to up-to-date research or up-to-date children, etc.?
Yeah. To be fair, I think most coaches that I work with in particular are very, and this is probably more because of the guy that oversees kind of the region and the club as a whole, bringing in the right people that are willing to be worked with. But yeah, I mean, like working with coaches like that who are maybe a bit more stuck in their ways a bit is it's kind of give and take in terms of experience and knowledge sharing. You have to be as open to what they're saying as you are hoping that they're open to what you're saying. So if I go in and have a discussion with a coach, it's a discussion first, right? I'm not just saying you need to change your ways because X, Y, and Z. It's a discussion on why they do certain things. And then it's me saying, okay, well, this is how I see things. And maybe that influences them a bit. But I think coaches become more aware of kind of like where kids are, especially coming out of COVID. I'm not sure what it's like in the UK, but just the other day we had the club as a whole had a mental health professional talk to all the coaches about the impacts that they're seeing of kids coming out of COVID. And, anxiety is through the roof. Depression in kids is through the roof. So like being exposed to more information like that, certainly helps all coaches kind of understand where kids are coming from in terms of how we can best help them as not only players, but also as just kids. So yeah, I think exposing coaches to that sort of information, is extremely helpful. And then going in and talking to them about why they do certain things and why we should be doing certain things as coaches is much more effective than just going in and being like, that's wrong. Don't do that. This is how you should be doing things. And I think with anyone, you're going to get more buy-in if you have a discussion about it and explain the reasons behind the methodologies than if you just go in and say, no, this is how we do it. And if you don't buy in, you're out.
Yeah, there is a anagram that I know for the fit in one, but I won't say that on air, which is basically for the coaches to fit in or off. So
Yeah.
I know that companies do use that on occasion. So I get moving topics onto the game model idea, which is obviously something you're kind of doing this year. Do you just want to explain, I guess, first and foremost, what game models are, and then how, in your context, you're looking around creating one that will then obviously be spread out along different coaches at different age groups, etc.
Yeah. It's different. It's so the personal like game model that I've developed, um, is an ideal. I mean, game models as a whole are very idealistic in this is how you want your team to play. These are the principles that you want. These are the sub principles that you want, etc. And some of that has to be adjusted to the players that you have, but I think there's definitely a spectrum of rigidness that coaches have in terms of how they apply their game model. In terms of the kind of the club wide game model, it's an interesting thing because obviously the players have a variety of skill. And on top of that, at most our players train 3 times a week. So when you look at the detail that you can go into, with players, it's not as substantial as it would be at a professional club. I know the Philadelphia Union here in the States have a residential academy. They train twice a day in the morning and in the evening, doing a variety of different activities in each session. Um, but they go at least 4 days a week. So you look at the contact time that those players have compared to players that we have is there's a significant difference. So our ability to implement, if we were given the same game model to implement, theirs would be significantly, they would have more success than what we are able to do. So part of part of what we try and do is provide our players a framework for decision making, and then touch upon. I mean, we have main principles that we want all teams to follow, but then those kind of sub principles are a bit harder to get across to the players. So that's where things kind of get fuzzy in terms of how teams implement it, and again, just even the ability to do so because of the limited amount of training sessions that we have with players.
In terms of a framework for decision making, what type of thing are we talking about?
Um, so, I mean, it's hard to kind of put it into an easily digestible thing at the moment, which isn't great. Um, but I think just in terms of like giving them kind of the freedom, I suppose it depends on the age group, right? So if we look at U9s, giving them that introduction to um, taking players on, but also thinking about how if you get stuck, what's your next? What can you do next with the ball? So if you can't take a player on anymore, if you're dribbling at someone but you can't beat them, what's your next step? So introducing him to that, and then as they progress to the age groups, introducing them to okay, so at U9, we were all about you taking a player on 1v1 as many times as you could. And if you got stuck, thinking about plan B. Um, at U13, now you have to think about the risk and reward of taking a player on in 1v1 situations, and does it help the team? Um, and is there a better decision that you can make that would help the team more than your individual self? So at like U9, taking a player on is what we want a player to do in pretty much all circumstances, because it's helping that player grow as an individual, even if it's somewhat detrimental to the team, right? If a center back picks up the ball and they try and dribble past a center forward at U9, that's fine, because we want them to, first of all, they're not a center back, right? They're just a player on the field at that age group. They just happen to be a bit deeper than the rest of their teammates. But a center back at U13, giving them that, okay, well, now you have a bit more responsibility to think about the team and the impact that your decisions on the ball can have on the team. And so you need to think about that risk and reward situation, and whether it's worth trying to take this player on, or whether you need to be more supportive of the team's goals as a whole, and obviously not conceding a goal in that situation.
I think,
So I
yeah,
think,
because I've seen a lot of models before that will go down the, you kind of dribble till your heart's content type of situation, where it sounds like just by adding in, but what next if you get stuck, kind of allows that thought process of, okay, well, I'm dribbling, that's probably my go-to, but it might not be there. So what's next? And then kind of allowing them to make a decision about what's next and building up. So I guess it's just having that, almost that extra bit of language to come in to go, we are dribbling. We know that we're going to encourage that, but what
yeah,
happens next? What happens if that's not on? What happens if over here we call it a sweaty. So pass it to someone who's on the 6 yard box with an open goal. Or what happens if you're in a 2v1 or 3v1? Having that extra little bit of language turns it from a almost command action, which is dribble, to a decision, which is dribble, but what if, or what
Yeah.
about this type of situation?
Yeah. I think a lot of that, like, so I coach the youngest team I coach is a U10 team. So to kind of give them, I do a lot of 1v1s all the time. Every single session I do 1v1s, but some sessions I'll do 2v2s just for that piece of it. Okay, well now you have someone that you can use. So for those what if situations, if you're dribbling at someone and you decide, well, I can't get past this person right now. Well, now I have someone that I can work with. So I would say 100% of my sessions, I do 1v1s. 50% of them, I do 2v2s to allow for those players to be exposed to that. Because again, I still want to encourage lots of dribbling in 1v1 situations, but I want to give them that what if and give them like, not just throw them out on game day and be like, okay, now what if, but we've worked on 2v2s in training. So now you have a better idea of what to do in that situation.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I think that, as you said, having that as that little decision making element makes a big difference to the players and what they're thinking as they're going into that, which is a big one. What this links into, and I've got I've got your Twitter page open in front of me because I think some of this is really interesting. So ultimately, obviously, with the younger age groups, you're looking to build this up to 11-a-side football.
Yeah.
And what I think you do a really nice job of is kind of breaking down the different aspects of football into superiorities or particular tactical threads, etc. So I guess the first port of call for me is, what made you go down this route? What made you produce this content? And then what's the process for you? If I look at one in particular, is kind of how you've broken down different pitches in accordance to, I guess, different team styles and how they look. I think you've got that Ajax on here, you've got Wolves on here, you've got Man City and stuff on here. So yeah,
Yeah.
firstly, what made you get into that work? And then two, what's your process for producing a body of work like that?
Yeah. So I think the first one I did was on half spaces and channels. Um, and for whatever reason, like I was on Twitter, I was seeing a lot of content that was using those two phrases interchangeably, and I was like, at least from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Twitter world, but those are very different terms for me. Like half spaces are a fixed area on the field, whereas channels are their reference point is the defenders on the field. So I saw those two phrases being used interchangeably, and I was like, well, I don't agree with that. So I'm gonna put something out there that gives my point of view on it. Um, and so I've always enjoyed kind of graphic design in a way. So I just decided, well, I already have Adobe Illustrator, so I'm just go in and make a graphic on it. And I think that first one like got a lot of views and things like that. So I just said to myself, all right, well, let me challenge myself to kind of come up with something that each week, because I do the Sunday shares. And so I kind of challenge myself each week to kind of think of something that I'm interested in that I can make kind of an illustration of. And so maybe it's something that I'll see on Twitter where someone's talking about a certain topic, and I think to myself, okay, I'm going to delve into that. The one with the different fields across, the different coaches and stuff, that was because I was thinking about how I would break down my field, and I was going around and looking at different examples of that.
Just
I
before
think
we carry on with this, obviously people can look at this on your Twitter. So what's your Twitter at, so that if people do want to come and have a look whilst they're listening to us talk about this, it gives them
Yeah.
an opportunity. So what's your Twitter page or your Twitter at?
It's at Pete, Pete, Mott, Motz.
Perfect. So we're all about defining the field, the examples, and what I've got in front of me, which obviously I'll talk through with you, is kind of Ajax Ten Hag, Atletico Simeone, Liverpool Klopp, City Guardiola, Salzburg, Jastly, I'm going to butcher that one, Arsenal Arteta, Leipzig Marsch, and Wolves Lager. And what I think it provides a really nice representation of is how different coaches probably view their game models and how it fits in slightly different for them. So if I'm looking at this, for example, Guardiola's a classic one with the five channels, if you will, with the wider channels and three down the middle. Then I look at someone like Arteta, for example, is working far more on a horizontal plane. And looking at that. So just whilst we talk about that, if people do want to drag that up, it gives them an opportunity to do so. So when you're watching a game, what enticed you to have a look at these individuals and then how that affected them, but also how that affected you when you were thinking about defining your field?
Yeah, so that was a big part of like, so once I started to look at these kind of layouts, you know, the next step for me was to go in, watch some games and like see if I could find like the reasonings behind these field layouts, which is, I think it's really difficult to do, but for some it's recognizable. Like, and I think the literature out there on like Guardiola in particular, like, oh, he doesn't want more than 3 players within a vertical channel. So some of that is pretty evident in games, although like, City, even now, like City overload wide areas like really well. So that 3 players in a channel thing is a bit different. But yeah, you look at someone like Arteta's who has like lots of horizontal lines, and you try and figure out, well, what information is that delivering to the players, and watching the games, like, is that just like lines of constraint? Is that like, how is that being implemented in the game? I think it's difficult to kind of think about and figure out sometimes, but I don't know, you try your best to kind of see how it relates to their game model. And there were some, like, I think it was Sarri's, or yeah, at Lazio. He's at Lazio right now, right? Yeah. So I went to Lazio's field because I was like, well, Sarri has a pretty unique style of play in terms of like, it's a rigid framework of like patterns and things like that. So let me see what um his field looks like. But it was just like a box around. It was a box like around the middle, like the center circle, and I was like, "There's no way that's like has any meaning." I couldn't figure it out, so I kept it off. Looking at it more, it doesn't even seem like it is something that's related to his style of play. Looking at it more, it looks like it's just he has, obviously it's a regular field with 2 18-yard boxes, but then it looks like he just has an 18-yard box on either side of the halfway line that they probably just use for like different exercises within their training sessions. So looking at some of them, it was like difficult to figure out whether it was like, we've just painted the field this way because it's easy for us to set things up, or whether it was actually related to like how they want their teams to play. Obviously, the ones I put on here are very much like related to how the teams want to play.
So I'll
Again,
give you
especially.
2 choices because I
Okay.
don't want to pigeonhole you in an area that might be really difficult to describe. But so I'm looking here, like Simeone's obviously is very, very narrow in here, kind of
Yeah.
5 channels within the 18-yard box and then 2 wide, so 7 channels. And you also got Arteta's, which is doing quick maths, 8 horizontal lines across the pitch, which kind of segregates the pitch up. So for either one of those, from what you're able to obviously define, what were you then able to see how that affected the way that they played or the way that they trained?
Yeah, well, I think with Simeone, I mean, his teams are all about kind of compactness, right? And so, um, having kind of that rigid, very narrow setup and having it on the field as it is in this example, I think you can very easily see that how that transfers into their game. Um, I mean, they played they played a 5-5 against Manchester City in the first leg of the Champions League. And you can see how, I mean, he's always been very compact in how he sets those teams up. Um, so I think that and the wide areas don't matter as much to him as the center of the field, which makes sense. So designating those different areas and having the players know those reference points for when they shift across as a team, whether he's playing a back four or a back five, is really evident from the trainings field that they have here to how they implement it in the game. With Arteta, I think those different areas are obviously related to how their lines progress together, probably more defensively than they do in an attacking setup. But admittedly, I probably don't watch Arsenal enough to fully understand why he has the field split up to how many did you say it was? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 8 different horizontal kind of sections. I don't watch Arsenal enough to really fully understand what he's trying to cross by having the training environment set up like that. I can take guesses, and I think with all these, we're somewhat taking a guess, but from an Arsenal perspective, it's a lot harder to have a definitive kind of confident answer.
Listen, as a Spurs fan, you're not missing much by not watching Arsenal, so don't worry about it. Although beating Chelsea was a bit of a nightmare for me, so hopefully Ronaldo turns up well this weekend. So I guess the next bit onto this, because people can see this stuff on Twitter and find that on social media, which is how is that and how does that then affect you when you're coming to do your game model, or when you're looking to have your principles of play, or philosophy of play, which are words that are bandied around a lot. How does this type of work help you when trying to create those?
Well, I think we all are going to take influences from all sorts of different people. And I mean, I'm a Liverpool supporter. So I love watching obviously what Liverpool do. I love how Guardiola plays and how his teams play. So from that perspective, it's obviously interesting for me to kind of understand what they're doing and how they're doing things, and why they're doing things, and try and take little bits and pieces from everyone, to create something that I like, from a game model perspective, and that I feel like I can implement. With the teams that I coach right now, I certainly wouldn't talk about, 8 different horizontal sections of the field, explicitly, but giving yourself kind of an idea of how you view the field, gives you a better kind of way to communicate with your players about, maybe if we go back to the risk and reward of a player dribbling at U13. As a coach, if you understand how you view the field, that gives you a better way to give your player a decision-making framework of when they have that kind of freedom to dribble and take players on, compared to when they should be thinking about the risk and reward of taking a player on. So I think giving yourself a better understanding of how you view the game and how you understand the field allows you to communicate more effectively what you want from your players in given situations.
How much do you think it affects? How much do you think defining the field or defining your parameters then affects the types of sessions you put on? So, in terms of if we're looking at Klopp, for example, very high pressing, heavy metal style of football and stuff, and he's talking about being able to attack as soon as you win it. How much do you think being able to define your field and say, well, actually, we want to play in these areas of the field because that allows us to counter more, then allows you when you're putting on a counter-attacking session or you're putting on a pressing session, allows you to say, well, we have to work in these areas because actually that reflects back to what our game model is, which is we win the ball back and we go and score within however many seconds. How much transferability is there within that?
I think in that specific example, I think there's a significant amount. Like I use a lot of field manipulation in terms of shapes and sizes of my fields. Even at the younger age groups, like, and some of that's not necessarily like a counter attacking, like it's not for a tactical reason, but like with my youngest teams, whenever we do like a game at the end, well, not whatever we do, but lots of times when we do a game at the end, I'll cut off the corners of the field and that's to impact their individual decision-making process when they're on the ball, because for whatever reason, there's a few players that have a habit of taking shots from the most ridiculous angles, right? So rather than continually like say to them, that's a really tough angle to take a shot from. Let's see if we can do something different with the ball. If you take away that option for them by taking away the corners of the field, well, now they have to, because they can no longer dribble to the corner of the field and try and shoot from there because that part of the field doesn't exist anymore. So I use a lot of field manipulation at the younger age groups for individual decision making, but then at the older age groups, I use it a lot for like you said, like tactical reasons and collective decision making. So I think if you're able to I think field manipulation is a huge part of, like, a huge constraint that we can use to apply, especially things like defining the field into our training sessions without necessarily talking about how we define the field. If we just put it out there as the field shape, the players' behaviors are impacted immediately. So it doesn't always have to be, I don't have to say to my players, I don't really value the wide areas, especially like from the tip of the 18 to the sideline. I don't value that area. If I just take that area away and not allow them to play in it, that changes their behaviors without me saying it to them, which I think is maybe even more effective.
Yeah, and what I guess it also stops is if you say you devalue that area, when there are opportunities to play in there, they then won't, because they're like, well, I might get told off for this by going in this area, where actually there might be circumstances where that's the right thing to do. David Beckham crossing from a wider area in behind, or Trent does it really well, obviously, for Liverpool. So actually, by constraining them in the practice design, it allows you to get across what probably your preference is, but it also allows you on occasion to say, 100% the right decision. You've made the decision to try and curl it in there. It didn't quite come off, but the actual thought process behind it's correct. So that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I think that's true. Like, we need, as coaches, we can never say never do X, Y, and Z, right? Because every single time a player's on the ball it's a different picture. And so they need to make the best decision that they see in front of them. And sometimes it's not what we would want, but it is the best decision to make. So yeah, I think that speaks really true to that circumstance. And in particular.
And my one of the kids is they always say, well, they used to say to me, like goalkeepers don't take penalties or something like that. And I'd be like, you've got Chilavert from Paraguay used to take penalties and free kicks. And it either used to go in rose head or back of the net. So that never say never type thing, I think is a really nice example, because then you tell them to go back and give them a YouTube and stuff, and then they come into training the next day and be like, you were right, he literally just smash it. And it is, you can never say never in football. One last question for me, which is who's the best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
Best player or coach I've worked with or against.
And why? Probably the more important.
Why? A few years ago, probably like maybe 5 years ago at this point, I was working for a pretty small club in Massachusetts, and we brought a coach over on a visa from Ireland. His name's Alistair Harvey, and he worked at Cherry Orchard in Dublin, but he came over here because he just wanted a different change of environment and things like that. But I think up until that point, I was very much I was very idealistic in how I wanted my teams to play, and not that he changed that, but he definitely challenged me on that all the time, because he would be like, he was much more pragmatic than me in terms of how he approached games. And his energy levels at training sessions was so high and had the players so engaged. So like in that sense, he really pushed me from a coaching perspective within my training sessions, but also, he didn't change how I view the game in terms of like my ideas are still my ideas, but he definitely challenged me and made me have a more confident kind of view on my game, because I had to think about it more, because he was always kind of pushing me to think about things differently and be like, well, if the longer ball's on, why wouldn't you play that longer ball? Well, I'd be like, well, because it doesn't help progress us collectively and things like that. But he'd be like, all right, well, why do you need to progress collectively if your players can be one-on-one with the goalkeeper? So he would constantly just probe at me. And it just, again, it made me more have to think about why I viewed the game the way I did more, and have kind of a much more solid foundation to kind of my ideas than I had before. So he was probably the most significant person that I've worked with in terms of constantly putting me under pressure and challenging me.
Perfect. I think it's a really good answer. And those sounding boards that do either repeat back to you or mirror back to you what you're doing, or challenge you, are really important in creating a good coach. So listen, Peter, really appreciate your time, and hope you can catch up again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.